Hello and welcome back to the inspiring channel where Kunle ministers spiritual edification and personal development.
If you're joining us for the first time, take the next few seconds to click the subscribe and notification buttons so you can catch up with the others on the latest and on future updates. And really, clicking these buttons would of course not cost you any charges nor interrupt your video, so please do that and stay tuned as we get into the content for today. First, we want to do a summary of what we learnt in the previous part of this series. The links to all the parts currently available would be in the description to this video, so you can go back to watch any previous parts before watching this one. The summary is as follows. 1. Translating just one word. What? We saw a very striking similarity between up to 9 African languages and the Hebrew language. Another quick example is the word for angel, which is malak in Hebrew and malaika in Tigrinya, Yoruba and Hausa languages, just to mention a few. And the word for peace or greeting in Hebrew is shalom and is salam or something very similar in Hausa, Aramaic and other African languages. 2. Though this was not said in the previous part, it is noteworthy that we do not find this kind of striking similarity to Hebrew in languages in the other continents like Asia, America or Europe. 3. Many of the African languages above are called Bantu or Shemitic languages, that is, languages relating to Shem, one of the forefathers of mankind. With these being said, let us show you the next steps in our discoveries. Today our first task is to divide the whole information we would be giving in this series into 3 main sections or areas. The 3 areas are as follows. Number 1 is the languages, the second is the people, and then finally, the lands and locations. The way we came about these 3 sections is simple and is as follows. In our search of human origins, we have been able to cut through and past the myths, tales, and oral traditions to get to actual documented facts. And speaking of documentation, many of the documentations we found were written in certain languages. These languages have led us to a people, and the people have been traced to a certain land, and we simply cannot talk about the history, the current state, and in fact the future of mankind without touching these truths. Communicating this information was very daunting in the beginning of this series, but after quite some planning, preparations and consultations, it didn't take long before we saw that we would have to be sharing our discoveries in these 3 divisions or sections, and this was one reason our first part began in languages. Now, let's wrap up on languages so we can move on to the other parts of our discussion. Let's begin. While searching for resources for this research, the most reliable materials we could find on the history of mankind are those written in what is called scriptures, and a great bunch of these scriptures were written in a language called Hebrew. By the way, by scriptures, we partly mean the Bible, which itself is a collection of human-selected but divinely inspired books, plus some more divinely inspired books that man decided not to put in that bunch of selection which he has called the Bible, and the word itself is from the Greek word biblia, which means books. We are not saying that the contents of the selected or the collection of the books called the Bible is not correct or not inspired. Rather, we are in fact saying that there are quite some more. There are more scriptures that were mentioned in the books of the Bible itself. Like the book of Jude speaks about Enoch's words, because there is a book of Enoch, and also there is a book of Jasher, which is referenced in Joshua 10 verse 13 and 2 Samuel 1 verse 18. People like to say these books were removed, but maybe it's more accurate to say that the books were simply not included in the compilation that man made. Now there are other scripts and hieroglyphics that have some interesting claims, but it has been found that these scripts are usually at best modifications and imitations of the real story and facts, and they are often drifting off into myths and invention of human deities rather than sticking with simple real historical events. So the Hebrew language and its closely related languages are the scripts that the oracles of the past, the present and even the future of mankind were kept in, over the thousands of years. The Hebrew language has undergone some transitions over the decades, but it is not untraceable. In fact, here is a table showing the transitions of alphabets and the parallels between the language and the English language in order to put things in perspective. Take a look at the table and see how the English alphabets were formed from the Greek and the Greek from the Old Paleo Hebrew. This agrees with part 1 of this series, how the English language was indirectly gotten from Semitic languages. In fact, this picture says in their own description and classification that both the Hebrew and the Arabic were formed from the Proto-Canaanite, and we know who the Canaanites are, that they are from the tribe of Ham, the proper Africans. Now the description Proto-Canaanite may not have been done with the scriptural family tree in mind, but most indications keep pointing to one continent. In addition, we see in the book of Jubilees 12:30 how it is said that Hebrew is the language or tongue of creation. The reference reads thus: "Get thee up from thy country, and from thy kindred, and from the house of thy father unto a land which I shall show thee. And I shall make thee a great and numerous nation. And I shall bless thee, and I shall make thy name great, and thou wilt be blessed in the earth. And in thee will all families of the earth be blessed, and I shall bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And I shall be a God to thee and thy son, and to thy son's son, and to all thy seed. Fear not, from henceforth and unto all generations of the earth I am thy God." Now listen closely to this next part. "And the Lord God said, Open his mouth and his ears, that he may hear and speak with his mouth, with the language which hath been revealed, for it had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men from the day of the overthrow of Babel. And I opened his mouth, and his ears and his lips, and I began to speak with him in Hebrew, in the tongue of the creation. And he took the books of his fathers, and these were written in Hebrew, and he transcribed them, and he began from henceforth to study them, and I made known to him that which he could not understand, and he studied them during the 6 rainy months." The reference above is speaking about Abraham. He was the 20th generation from Adam, as shown in the KM Table of Nations chart. Apart from the connections of the Hebrew language to languages in Africa, we began to follow the story and family line from the first man, Adam. This led us to see some carvings and drawings which depict images of people with certain physical features that narrowed down our search to a certain people. Now, this is a sensitive part of our discovery because it relates with people, and we do not intend to be disrespectful to any set of people of any part of the world. But in writings, in scripture, and even contemporary history, the people of the Hebrew nation, Israel, are usually perpetually under slavery, or at best, in and out of slavery, from one generation to the other. In fact, no matter how we try to describe them, we simply cannot do this without mentioning the reality of the history of slavery the people went through after they forsook their God, the God of creation. This being said, let us have a look at some of the pictures and carvings. Here is a picture popularly known as the Lachish relief. It is a monument made by Sennacherib, a king of Assyria, of his defeat of the people of Judah. We see that the captives in the carving clearly have African looks. By the way, Assyrians are descendants of Ashur, a son of Shem, as shown on the Table of Nations. Also, take a look at this image of the depiction of the Israelites in their oppression in Egypt. Note that we may tend to use the names Hebrew, Israelite, and Jews interchangeably, but the real disambiguation is that Hebrew is the more general umbrella term for natives who speak the language, and it is from the word Eber, which is said to mean other side. Eber is also the name of one of the ancestors of Abraham, but the language existed before that name. An Israelite is someone that is a descendant of Israel. Then the Jews are descendants of Judah, and Judah is the southern kingdom of Israel. So as we saw before, the Egyptians are descendants of Mizraim, a son of Ham. By this same picture, we can see that the features of both the Egyptians and Israelites are proper darker-skinned Africans, and scriptures corroborate this, as is see that Joseph was thought to be from Egypt by his brothers, as written in Genesis 42 verse 8. Moses was called an Egyptian by the daughters of Jethro, or Ruel, in Exodus 2 verse 19. Paul, a Hebrew, was mistaken for an Egyptian, as written in Acts 21 verse 38, and many more examples like these. Today, however, you would not see Egyptians portrayed as dark-complexioned, especially in movies. Have you ever wondered why you see and hear so many so-called Egyptologists telling the history of Egypt in a certain way, and hardly any one of them are native Egyptians, but mainly Euro-Americans? Do we not think the native Egyptians can tell their own history? But you see, history as we know it is usually written by those who won the wars, and hence the Hellenization of the world. Hellenistic, by the way, means relating to Greek history, language, and culture from the death of Alexander the Great to the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony by Octavian in 31 BC.
During this period, Greek culture flourished, spreading through the Mediterranean and into the Near East in Asia and centering on Alexandria in Egypt and Pergamum in Turkey. And Hellenization means the adoption of Greek culture, religion, language, and identity by non-Greeks.
In the ancient period, colonization often led to the Hellenization of indigenous peoples. In the Hellenistic period, many of the territories which were conquered by Alexander the Great were Hellenized. The word Hellen, by the way, is simply an old word for Greek. We have discovered again that some paintings like this one of Jesus and the disciples, and many more of the original paintings have been repainted in order to make certain notable characters in history to have more European fair-skinned features.
Even the Gospels, which theologians have said were written in Greek, were actually written in Hebrew, or at least Aramaic, as this historian pointed out.
And truly, on second thought, why would a Hebrew people, like James, who is Yakub, Matthew, which means Matt, that Yahweh, John, which means Yahweh Hannah, that is Yahweh is gracious, write accounts and letters to their own people in another language? Why and how would the epistle to the Hebrews, that is the book of Hebrews, be written in Greek? No, they were probably all translated. In fact, this quote is from Irenaeus, who fought against heresy, and was said to have helped define Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as the four Gospels. He said Matthew also issued a written gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect, while Paul and Peter were preaching in Rome. Irenaeus was said to have been martyred by Lucius Septimius Severus, who was a Roman emperor from 193 to 211. He was born in Leptis Magna, present-day Alcums, Libya, in the Roman province of Africa. This Septimius was the first African Roman emperor. Again, you would read from your internet search that Irenaeus was a defender of the papacy, and by papacy, they mean Peter and the disciples. The major sources of information would refer to Peter as the so-called first pope. Meanwhile, there was nothing like the term pope before it was created by the Roman Catholic Church. Just as the name suggests, it is a Roman church, but if history as we know it would teach that Irenaeus was defending the papacy and that the Gospels were written in Greek and then portray Septimius as European, could the same history have altered some more things and portrayed the disciples and Yeshua himself as people of another nationality or even locality? We would leave this question with you and end this part here. In the next part, we would talk more about the people who are the Hebrews then and today. Let's wrap up this video here to prevent the video from being too long. Here is the summary of what we have learned so far. There are three areas of our study. 1. The language which we have established to be Hebrew. 2. The people, and 3. The land. The English language and many languages before them were formed from the Paleo-Hebrew. The Hebrew language is in fact the language of creation, and was restored to Abraham of the lineage of Arphaxad, a descendant tribe of Shem. Abraham was then able to read the scriptures and books written by his fathers in the Hebrew language. There are ancient pictures and carvings that show us that the Hebrews have African features. In scriptures, Hebrews, like Joseph, Moses, Paul, etc., are usually mistaken for Africans in appearance. Israelites are usually in and out of slavery because of the curse of God, Yahweh, on them, because of their disobedience. The world was Hellenized because the Hellens, that is the Greeks, conquered the world and began to rewrite history in a biased way, by repainting and so on, to make certain notable characters in history appear light-skinned or to have other European features. The Gospels, contrary to popular notion, was written in Hebrew, not Greek, and the assembly after the death of Jesus was not a Catholic church, and Peter was in fact not a pope. The papacy was a Roman Catholic system and not from the people of Israel. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to be notified when the next videos are released. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video. God bless you.
Lift your hands, yeah.